A journalist visited by the police over a tweet. Welcome to 21st century Britain, where woke authoritarianism has truly run amok. This month, news broke that Telegraph columnist Allison Pearson had been visited by Essex police on Remembrance Sunday, over a year-old post on X. 2 police officers knocked at her door and informed her that she was being investigated for inciting racial hatred. They invited her to attend a voluntary police interview. Most chillingly, they didn't say which tweet it was, or who her accuser was. Kafkaesque might be thrown around a lot these days, but this case surely qualified. Thankfully, common sense has now prevailed. Essex police have announced that they have closed the investigation, following advice from the Crown Prosecution Service. Still, Pearson's brush with England's pound shop Stasi has been grimly instructive of the sorry state this country is in where freedom of speech is concerned. The story goes roughly like this. A year ago, just as anti-Israel demonstrations were roiling Britain's streets, routinely spilling over into anti-Semitism and occasional outright celebration of Hamas, Pearson tweeted the following. "How dare they?" she said, atting London's Metropolitan Police. Invited to pose for a photo with lovely, peaceful British friends of Israel on Saturday, police refused. Look at this lot, smiling with the Jew haters. She was quote tweeting and commenting on an image depicting police officers posing with protesters who were holding up the flag for a Pakistani political party. She'd apparently assumed, mistakenly, that they were pro-Hamas, pro-Islamist or anti-Israel demonstrators. Pearson deleted the post soon after. The image, as it turns out, was taken months before all the post-October the 7th hate marches had begun. And it was in Manchester, not London. She seemingly didn't look too closely at the flag either, which alongside an Islamic crescent moon and star had the words Pakistan and the name of the party printed on it. It was, by any fair estimation, a clumsy mistake, made on a platform that encourages users to react first and ask questions later. But still, it was enough to launch a farcical, year-long hate speech investigation. Someone reported it to the police. Said snitch gave an interview to The Guardian, which identified them only as a former public servant with training in criminal law. The complaint then pinged around various police forces as England's finest tried desperately to work out what speech crime, if any, had been committed here. According to the Telegraph, the tweet was first reported to the Metropolitan Police, who investigated it as a potential breach of the Malicious Communications Act. It was then passed on to Sussex Police for some reason, who considered marking it down as a non-crime hate incident. We'll discuss those in more detail later. Having finally worked out that Pearson lives in Essex, the cops then handed the case over to Essex Police, who decided the tweet represented a possible public order offence, namely spreading material likely or intended to cause racial hatred, a far more serious crime than the other forces had even considered. Carrying on like a Stalinist version of the Keystone Cops, Essex Police not only sent officers round on Remembrance Sunday, they also set up a so-called Gold Group, typically used to coordinate police responses to major incidents like terror attacks. Essex Police have been so thoroughly humiliated by all this that there is now going to be an independent review into their handling of the case, led by the hate crime lead of the National Police Chiefs Council. So ends a particularly embarrassing chapter in the story of Britain's literal PC police. But will lessons be learned, to use that insufferable cliche? If recent experience is anything to go by, almost certainly not. Indeed, for all the welcome shock that Pearson's case has sparked in the anti-woke world, Elon Musk naturally has weighed in, it won't have come as a surprise to those who've been paying attention. Britain hasn't been suddenly turned into a dictatorship by newly elected Prime Minister Keir Starmer, as some of the more wild-eyed voices on X might have you believe, but it has been engaged in a decades-long, deeply illiberal experiment in policing hate speech that is now making us a laughingstock the world over. The offence of inciting racial hatred, of which Pearson was accused, was first written into British law back in 1965 with the passage of the Race Relations Act. This set a precedent that it was the job of the state to police hatred that later moral crusaders would exploit. In 2006, the then new Labour government passed the Racial and Religious Hatred Act, introducing the offence of incitement to religious hatred. Were it not for a successful campaign to rein in the law led by comedian Rowan Atkinson, it would have criminalised abusive or insulting language about religion as well. But arguably, Blair's far bigger contribution to hate speech legislation came with the Communications Act of 2003. Under Section 127 of the law, it is illegal to send, by means of a public electronic communications network, a message or other matter that is grossly offensive. While this mirrored a pre-existing telecoms offence, it served to update it for the digital age. Indeed, the combination of Britain's already repressive speech laws and the dawn of the social media era proved to be a disastrous and authoritarian mix. In the early 2010s, there were a slew of cases in which students and young people were sent to prison for saying stupid, outrageous, often downright despicable things on social media, often while drunk. In 2012, Swansea student Liam Stacey was convicted of a racially aggravated public order offence over racist tweets he posted about footballer Fabrice Muamba, after Muamba collapsed from a heart attack during a game. Stacey was sentenced to 56 days in prison. That same year, teenager Matthew Woods was jailed for 3 months for a string of grossly offensive Facebook posts about missing young girls April Jones and Madeleine McCann. While also inebriated and at a friend's house, Woods began his tirade by copying, pasting and sharing sick jokes from the website Sickopedia. There was also Jake Newsom, given 6 weeks in prison in 2014 for saying on Facebook that he was glad that a Leeds teacher had been murdered by a pupil. In 2012, 20-year-old Azar Ahmed was fined £300 in order to do community service for posting again on Facebook that all soldiers should die and go to hell. The investigations, arrests and even convictions for hateful and offensive speech often reached well beyond genuine bigots and obnoxious teenagers. Telling jokes became a risky business. Famously, Paul Chambers was found guilty in 2010 of sending a menacing electronic communication for an obvious joke on Twitter. He threatened to blow up Robin Hood Airport after he was infuriated to find out that it was closed. As the trans issue came into view, it became clear that even mainstream opinions, such as not believing that men can become women, could also be branded as hateful by our increasingly identitarian authorities. Gender-critical feminist Kate Scotto was arrested in 2018 for causing needless anxiety after she persistently called a man he on social media. It was overturned on appeal. Christian preacher David McConnell similarly had to be tried and convicted before the courts realised that misgendering isn't actually a crime. Not yet, at least. Not only did those supposedly freedom-loving Conservatives do nothing during their 14 years in power to repeal any of this legislation, they actually made things worse. They passed the Online Safety Act, which incentivises big tech firms to censor speech and introduced new or updated communications offences. Following the despicable race riots that exploded across England this past summer, there were a string of convictions for inciting hatred and posting grossly offensive material. A Romanian man was also convicted of a false communications offence for posting a video of himself pretending to flee from a far-right mob. Those riots, if nothing else, reminded us that censorship does not make racism magically disappear from a society, but it does encroach upon all of our freedoms, upending the lives not only of those who spew undoubted bigotry, but also those whose only real crime is to say something that someone, somewhere, has decided to be offended by. What's more, precious few of these unwitting speech criminals are like Allison Pearson, with the profile and resources to push back. More often it's people like the 16-year-old autistic girl with scoliosis from Leeds who was hauled away in handcuffs in 2023 on suspicion of a homophobic public order offence. Reportedly, she had told a female police officer that she resembled her lesbian nana.
Your woman, that she said the word lesbian. Her nana is a lesbian, she's married to a woman. She's not homophobic, look what you're clenching your fist. Go away from my teenage daughter.
Britain may not be the GDR-style tyranny that some American anti-woke warriors now imagine it to be, but we should not downplay what is going on here either. We in Britain are almost certainly arresting more people for speech today than at any point in modern history. An investigation by The Times in 2017 indicated that at least 9 people a day were then being arrested for offensive speech under Section 127 of the Communications Act alone. Greg Lukianoff, president of the US-based Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, has calculated on the basis of those incomplete numbers alone that Britain is already comfortably arresting more people for speech crimes today than America did during the first Red Scare. But this is not simply a problem of authoritarian politicians passing censorious laws or even unprincipled successors failing to repeal them. Police forces themselves deserve their share of the blame as well. Top cops have come to see policing speech as a kind of moral mission with disastrous consequences.
We're going to end two-tier policing, sir.
They've even taken to ostentatiously encouraging members of the public to report so-called hate speech. In 2021, Merseyside police parked an electronic billboard outside an Asda, declaring in all caps that being offensive is an offence. Sadly, they weren't far wrong. Similarly, back in 2018, South Yorkshire Police, again totally of their own volition, launched a Hate Hurts campaign to tackle the apparent scourge of offensive comments.
We've just relaunched our Hate Hurts campaign.
Then there is the rise of the Non-Crime Hate Incident, or NCHIs. For years now, police have been investigating and recording supposedly hateful incidents, even if they do not rise to the threshold of a criminal offence. is by turns sinister and ridiculous. Until a few years ago, police guidance instructed officers to record any reported hate incident as a hate incident on the basis of accusation and perception alone. Even things that were clearly trivial or complaints that were clearly malicious would be immediately recorded. Some classics of the genre include a man who believed he was getting funny looks on the bus, and another who felt he received an aggressive haircut because he speaks Russian. Worst of all, NCHIs can also show up in advanced background checks, thus potentially haunting the job prospects of the alleged hate monger in question. NCHIs have their roots in the 1999 Macpherson report, the inquiry into the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence and the police's botched investigation into it. One of Sir William Macpherson's recommendations was a comprehensive system of reporting and recording of all racist incidents and crimes. Racist incidents should be defined, Macpherson added, as any incident which is perceived to be racist by the victim or any other person. But crucially, NCHIs weren't ushered in by laws debated and passed in Parliament. Police bodies developed hate crime guidance incorporating Macpherson's recommendations, while also expanding them to other forms of hate. A shared approach was slowly adopted across the criminal justice system, with essentially zero public scrutiny or awareness. In 2014, the College of Policing published its hate crime operational guidance, which told police to automatically record reported hate incidents irrespective of whether there is any evidence to identify the hate element. That guidance was eventually declared unlawful by the Court of Appeal in 2021. Campaigner and former police officer Harry Miller, who had an NCHI recording against him for gender-critical tweets, successfully argued that the guidance represented a disproportionate interference in freedom of speech. The Home Office later issued new statutory guidance in 2023, aimed at reining in the collection of NCHIs to weed out trivial, irrational and malicious complaints, and to ban the practice entirely in relation to incidents in schools. Tellingly, none of this has made the blindest bit of difference. For one thing, a recent investigations in the Times found that non-crime hate incidents are still being recorded against school children, often for little more than playground taunts. This includes 2 secondary school girls who said that another pupil smelt like fish. Here we see that the new censorship regime is not something that's simply been foisted upon police, but actively, if cack-handedly, embraced across the state. Since the Macpherson report, which declared the police institutionally racist, police have bizarrely come to see obsessing over speech and offence as essential to improving their standing among ethnic minority communities. Indeed, whenever a free speech controversy arises, police higher-ups defend themselves in therapeutic identitarian terms. Following the College of Policing's defeat in the Miller case, Assistant Chief Constable Ian Raphael insisted they were only trying to protect vulnerable people and communities from harm. It's paternalistic and it's perverse. Apparently, ethnic minority Brits want the police to protect them from being offended, as opposed to being robbed or stabbed. That the police's failure to properly investigate the racist murder of Lawrence is now being used to justify this crusade against hurtful words is morally obscene. Surprising as it may sound to some, the police have proven themselves no more impervious to the Great Awakening, to the rise of identitarian ideology, than any other wing of the state. If anything, this ideology has proven particularly irresistible to an institution that is desperate to be seen to be atoning for its past wrongs. Our liberties then aren't being trampled on by some would-be strongman. They're being trampled on by a self-loathing establishment, censoring in pursuit of purpose, moral authority and redemption. Still, Britain remains a warning to the world. The police visiting journalists over tweets. The new authoritarianism can be alarmingly like the old, if you allow it to take root.